Right, welcome everybody. I am delighted to welcome you to this joint webinar between the CLA, the NFU, Forestry Commission and the Wildlife Trusts. We want to talk to you today about a really exciting project, and I just want to first start by introducing myself. I'm Roger Mortlock. I'm Chief Executive of Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, and I'm here today because the three wildlife trusts in the three counties, Gloucestershire, Herefordshire and Worcestershire, have come together for a project called Severn Treescapes, which we're going to be talking about this morning. I think all of us have known, and we're going to hear more this morning about the this afternoon about the importance of tree planting, especially in the farm environment. One of the things that I think we've been concerned about in the Wildlife Trust is how can we kind of think bigger about those tree planting initiatives, so thinking about scale. So this Severn Treescapes project was born out of the Wildlife Trust working together with Forestry Commission colleagues and others to think about how might we think about a really large woodland creation project in our area. And the idea emerged for a project that linked the Forest of Dean here in Gloucestershire right the way through Herefordshire to the Wyre Forest in Worcestershire. So a 60-mile corridor of a treescape, so not woodland cover, that's a really important thing we'll come back to, but a woodland network that allowed wildlife to kind of to use that corridor. We know since the Lawton report in 2011 that wildlife needs bigger, better, more connected places, and we know from Montreal and more recent government announcements that the government have been encouraging sort of 30% of the country to be operational for wildlife trusts. But we also know we've got a real big food security challenge, and that this area, we're very acutely aware, is a very productive landscape in terms of food production. So we want to see how we can investigate how we can work in partnership with you all to produce food and to create more woodland cover. So those two themes about trying to create something at scale, but actually at the same time doing that in partnerships, are real signatures of this Severn Treescapes projects. We're aware at the same time that there are a number of different treescapes and tree planting initiatives in the country. We've just come out of the fantastic Queen's Green Canopy initiative, and we've got a number of other initiatives, not least those being promoted by Forestry Commission, which we're going to hear a lot more about this morning. But we've also got some really innovative work happening in the country just about exploring how we can introduce trees into the farmed environment in new ways. And I'm delighted that we've also got Ben Raskin from the Soil Association, who's been a real cheerleader for agroforestry. So we've got a fantastic panel for you this morning. I just wanted to quickly run through who we've got. We're starting with Will Macefield, who's our project manager for the Severn Treescapes initiatives. Will's going to talk about the project that we have with Treescapes. I think for us, the real focus of the day is how we can kickstart conversations with farmers and landowners in this massive region, so that we can begin to think about how we build together a kind of contiguous 60-mile corridor. We've also got, I'm delighted, Emma Clitheroe, who's Business Development Advisor at Forestry Commission. Emma's going to be talking to us about the grants that are available and demonstrating how woodland creation can be part of your farm business. And adding to that story, we've got Graham Clark, who's Senior Land Policy Advisor at the CLA nationally, a former colleague of ours in the southwest here, but he's going to be talking about how landowners can make informed decisions about tree planting. And then finally, as I mentioned, we've got Ben Raskin, who's Head of Horticulture and Agroforestry at the Soil Association, talking to us about how agroforestry can be part of the farm business mix. Just a few bits of housekeeping from me. We're in a webinar format, so kind of slightly less interactive than the normal Zoom you might be interested in, but really we're interested to hear from you. So one of the things we're keen to do is for you to use the Q&A function to put your questions as we go through today. So just on this slide, you can see at the bottom, if you just wiggle your mouse at the bottom of your screen, you've got some options to enter a question. If you pop a question in there, we'll get to as many as we can during the webinar, and our panelists, and there's some other people here who can answer them for those questions you have. If you are joining halfway through, or if you're watching in a recording, we will be circulating the slides, and the recording will be available for those people who've registered. So, without further ado, sorry, long introduction from me, but lots to get through today, and no better place to start than with Will Macefield, who's going to give us an outline of what the Severn Treescapes project is and how we're going to go about it. Will, over to you.
Thank you, Roger. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm Will Macefield. I'm the Severn Treescapes project manager with Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust. And as Roger said, we're here to tell you about the opportunities for landowners that the Severn Treescapes project can help you to take advantage of. So we believe that the various grants that are available, and you'll hear about some of those today, provide the opportunity for every farmer and landowner in the area to be able to play a part in supporting the natural world and the health of the environment. But at the same time, there are good business reasons to do that. So it's a win for nature and a win for landowners as well. So over the next 10 minutes, I'll give you a quick overview of the Severn Treescapes project, how we hope to help you support nature's recovery and the economics of your business. And we want to make this an informative event. Well, not just an informative event, but a meaningful one in terms of the actions that come out of it. So specifically, if anybody watching now or watching the recording of this thinks there might be a way of getting more trees onto your land, and we'll discuss a number of ways in which this could be a good idea for you, we want you to get in touch with us, so through our websites or through emails that we'll put in the chat during this webinar as well after this talk. We have advisors in Gloucestershire, in Worcestershire and in Herefordshire who can support you to find the right grants for you to make this process as simple as possible. And if you're in the Treescapes project area, and I'll show that in the next slide, they're ready to arrange farm visits with you to talk about these different opportunities. So in terms of the where, the Treescapes is spanning 3 counties, as Roger has just said. So from the Lower Wye Valley and the Forest of Dean in the south, right up to the Wyre Forest in the north, and taking in those 3 shire towns, cities, I guess, of Gloucester, Hereford and Worcester as well. Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust and Worcestershire Wildlife Trust and Herefordshire Wildlife Trust are working together in partnership with the Forestry Commission and in partnership with others across the area. So if your land falls within these boundaries, and they're not hard boundaries, then we can free up specific time to help. So having said they're not hard boundaries, that Severn Treescapes area is not a random shape. It's a slightly strange shape, but it's not a random shape because this has been highlighted through the opportunities that have been highlighted through our nature recovery network mapping, and it connects 4 nationally important landscapes. So the Wye Valley AONB, the Forest of Dean, the Malvern Hills AONB and the Wyre Forest. And there's a real opportunity here to connect an ancient woodland, an extensive woodland core, ready to seed a new climate resilient landscape. And the project is spanning some of the largest areas of semi-natural ancient woodland and historic hunting forest in the country. But if you look at the map here, you can see that while it might look like there's lots of woodland, across these landscapes, there are areas where they're very small and fragmented, and there are big gaps in connectivity that can prevent the movement of many less mobile species. So our biodiversity becomes more vulnerable and less resilient to change. And these arrows are about those longer term opportunities of developing even further westwards to the Wentwood Forest, across to the Black Mountains, up to the Shropshire Hills, or eastwards to the Heart of England Forest and the Cotswolds. And while that previous map showed the woodland, this one shows the people. So the project area is within 30 miles of about 8 million people, which is 12% of the UK population. So there's a great opportunity there for engagement with local communities, and that's a strong strand of this project as well. We're also working with the BBC Radio Gloucestershire's Arboretum programme, which encourages people to grow saplings from local seeds, and these can then be used to plant up, for example, gaps in hedgerows or in smaller projects where landowners might not be wanting to be involved in some of the bigger schemes. Realism and pragmatism are at the heart this project. So we know there's a lot of highly productive land across the area. In fact, about 20% of the project area is either grade 1 or grade 2 farmland. And we're not trying to change that for a minute, but we recognise that farms are food production areas and food production centres, as well as part of the solution to the climate crisis and to restoring nature. And we want to demonstrate that these can go hand in hand. And I think that's what's most exciting about the project, actually, is it's looking for that common ground. And the aim of the Treescapes Advisors is to help landowners to find places to plant the trees which add and benefit farming enterprises and don't replace them. And I think that's what's exciting. So we're working in partnership across the area. So there are other places to get advice, but we're all talking to each other and really making sure that what we're doing is complementary and not contradictory. And you'll hear from others today as well that it's not necessarily about planting woodland blocks across the landscape, but improving connections with trees and shrubs and other habitats. And that means hedges and wood pasture and infield trees and shelter belts and riparian buffers and orchards and other agroforestry systems as well, potentially all in the height of highly productive agricultural land, as well as woodland planting where that's appropriate. So the speakers after me are going to say a bit more about the multiple benefits of trees in the farmed landscape, about things like soil stabilisation and biodiversity, and flood alleviation and carbon capture, about shelter for livestock and diversified income. And all of this is key to the Severn Treescapes project, because we want to be a project that bridges that gap and helps to connect landowners with the most appropriate opportunities. I wouldn't be surprised if you hear every speaker today talk about the right tree in the right place for the right reason. And without going into all the nuances of that, because it's very much a case-by-case basis, I do want to emphasise that this process needs to be thoughtful, and it will be thoughtful, not just from a biodiversity point of view, from a nature point of view, but because trees aren't appropriate in every situation, but also from a landowner point of view, from a farm business point of view. And if we're talking one-to-one, these are exactly the sort of things that we would be thinking about. So our advisors will be able to discuss what your ambitions are, how the site fits into the nature recovery network and the ecosystem service mapping that we've been doing to help work out the best planting opportunities and to help you to select the best funding options as well. The project will also provide resources to highlight these opportunities, and not just information events like this one, but also demonstration events, farm visits where we can see face to face and talk about these interventions on site, as well as make videos for sites which are a bit further afield perhaps and harder for us to get to. So there's lots of brilliant grants out there, and some of these you'll hear about today. So on the face of it, and there are probably more than this. So on the face of this can look quite confusing, but there's another way to look at that. And the good news really is that whatever your plans are, if you're interested in integrating trees into your land holding, then there's likely to be a grant that can help you to do that. So when we meet you, we can talk about which might be suitable for you and sort of transparently discuss the pros and cons of each. And I'm nearly done. So just quickly, this is the project delivery team at Treescapes. I'm the project manager, and we've got Anne Harris and Charlotte Vincent in Gloucestershire, Charlotte Bell in Herefordshire, and Lawrence Richards in Worcestershire, and Megan Finn is our community engagement and comms coordinator. And these are the email addresses and the website addresses that are relevant, and we'd really like you to get in contact with us. So do note down those that might be relevant to you. And either my email address is there, and we'll drop these in the chat right now. I can signpost you to the relevant advisors otherwise, but it's Charlotte in Gloucestershire and Anne in Gloucestershire too, Charlotte Bell in Herefordshire and Lawrence in Worcestershire. And I think that's all I'm going to say. That was my last slide, so we look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening, and I'll hand back to Roger.
Will, thank you very much. I think we've got a sense from there of the scale. The maps are really, really helpful. I mean, one of the things I just wanted to stress was that, and leading back into Emma, is that this initiative started very early doors. When you look at those maps, you'll see it links two of our public forest estate, the Forest of Dean and the Wyre Forest. And so our very early conversations were with Emma's colleagues in Forestry England. And soon as they got excited about the idea, they put us in touch with the Forestry Commission, who have been great partners with us on this project ever since. So I'm delighted that we've got Emma with us, Emma Clitheroe, who's going to talk to us about some of the opportunities and some of the grants available, so that we can explain, and she's going to be explaining to us how woodland can be part of a farm business. So Emma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Roger. I'll just hope that it goes into a PowerPoint. There we go. We're away. Right, yes, so my name's Emma Clitheroe. I am a business development advisor within the Forestry Commission, and I cover the West Midlands area. So today we're just talking a bit more about inspiring woodland creation and also discussing some of the grants that we've currently got on offer. So this slide is not exhaustive, but it helps to highlight some of the main benefits of trees. Something to consider is that until now, woodlands have mostly been viewed as quite separate from a farm business or land enterprise, but this is changing, and woodlands are slowly becoming viewed as more of an important part of a land system as we begin to understand the benefits that they can provide, as well as contributing to natural capital. Looking at the investments of woodland planting, direct commercial future benefits include return from timber and wood fuel, and indirect commercial benefits include factors such as improving water and air quality and reducing pollution. Pollution in rivers is high and water quality across the country is failing. Such pollution can be traced back to agricultural residue entering the rivers like fertiliser and pesticides from spray drift due to inadequate field margins or buffers. If the land use was to be changed to forestry, this would stop the drift almost immediately, as the trees create a physical shield and actually work to mop up excess nutrients as they grow. And trees have actually now been proven to capture up to 90% of spray drift from pesticides. Not only this, but near a watercourse, the root network from a tree stabilises soil and can also count towards creating dappled shade and keeping rivers cool, and also help maintain biodiversity within a watercourse. Trees obviously also provide a good natural shelter for animals and crops, and studies have shown the addition of trees have reduced lamb loss and ewes by 30% and have increased wheat yield by 3.5%. Trees provide a natural source of shelter from heat, wind and rain, which results in increased animal performance and productivity. Another benefit of trees is the ability to improve air quality. Trees are particularly effective scavengers of air pollutants due to being tall and having a rougher and higher surface, enabling them to generate more air turbulence than smooth surface like water or lower vegetation. This mechanical turbulence promotes dry deposition of ammonia to the leaf surface and therefore enhances air quality. Upwind, this is beneficial in being able to reduce emissions from slurry lagoons and reducing the wind speed over its surface, and downwind trees are able to recapture the ammonia themselves through increased turbulence and deposition velocities, as well as increase the dispersion above the canopy through increased mixing, thereby reducing the deposition to nearby sensitive habitats and residential areas. So this slide just looks at the woodlands and the maintenance of good woodlands that can provide new opportunities for business diversification and multiple reliable income streams. So you've got timber and wood fuel. With timber in high demand, you could benefit from short or long-term revenue streams, planting and harvesting fast-growing trees that can be coppiced or felled on a frequent turnover, but may be less profitable over time than slower-growing high-quality timber. Local wood fuel production can also provide efficient energy savings to heat buildings and provide an income through sales. And there are also other wood products to consider, such as the production of Christmas trees, wood for construction and furniture, as well as coppice materials for wood chippings and temporary fencing. So we've also got the carbon offsetting. This is a this is through the means of being able to register with the Woodland Carbon Code, which allows you to sell carbon units for every tonne of carbon dioxide as early as 5 years after planting, helping to generate extra income, and also recreation, which we saw a real need for during the last few years through COVID times, and also moving forward with well-being. So Woodland offers a number of recreational opportunities from footpaths to glamping and forest schools. So a bit of an introduction to some of the improved funding options through the Forestry Commission and what we've got on offer depending on different types of treescapes and type of land holdings. These are the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. So the Woodland Creation Planning Grant is available for land in England with a minimum application of 5 hectares. So this can be split into smaller blocks of 0.1 hectare with a 20-metre width. To suit the planting purposes of the land that the landowner needs, and it really is what it says on the tin, a grant to support the planning of a woodland and woodland creation. So payments in this scheme include £1,000 to complete a stage 1 checklist, and following that at stage 2 a landowner can get £150 per hectare to produce a creation design plan with a 70% contribution towards any specialist surveys needed. So next up, we've got the England Woodland Creation Offer, or UCO, as it's otherwise known as. So UCO is our new flagship grant scheme, which is more generous than any other woodland creation grant for a generation, and it offers a diverse range of options. The UCO offer rewards farmers and landowners for establishing new woodland that offers environmental and social public benefits. It works to cover standard costs for the capital activities and items required to create a woodland. It helps to maintain young trees with annual payments, supports the actual cost of installing infrastructure to manage the woodland or improve recreational access, and allows the flexibility to create woodland that works for the landowner. Applications for UCO can be for as little as 1 hectare, which can be made up of blocks as small as 0.1 hectare with a 20-metre width, with no maximum application size. But land must be free from any existing grant schemes, and all proposals must be UKFS compliant. We also have the Woodland Carbon Code and the Woodland Carbon Guarantee, which we'll look at after having a bit more of a detailed look at the UCO grant. So looking in a bit more detail at the England Woodland Creation Offer, UCO is a very moldable grant to create a woodland with various differing objectives which can be led to create an attractive offer, which include planting for biodiversity and landscaping. But just to note, UCO can't be granted on land already in existing countryside stewardship schemes, and all applications need to be in line, as I said, with UKFS, which is the UK forestry standard. So looking at how UCO stacks up financially, you have the capital costs, which support the capital items and activities to create a new woodland, which are appealing as it's a bigger menu of standard costs compared to the countryside stewardship, and a new higher maximum cap for standard costs with up to £10,200 per hectare, depending on the nature of objectives that the woodland meets. On top of that, you can get a rate to support activities such as 40% of the cost of infrastructure for woodland management and 100% towards the cost of recreation infrastructure such as footpaths, gates, waymarkers, benches, steps, and small car parks. Annual maintenance payments of £350 per hectare help with the maintenance of the woodland to ensure its success, and these are paid every year for 10 years and are intended to help towards replacing any trees that die, keeping trees free of vegetation, managing fences and shelters, and removing and disposing of tree guards. The stackable contribution payments mirror the benefits of woodland creation, such as supporting nature recovery, flood alleviation, water quality, public access for health and well-being, and riparian buffers. Individually, these objectives have a payment price, and multiple objectives are able to be claimed together, helping to build the package of the woodland offer. Private finance is also able to be sought under UCO. So just to look at those additional contributions in a bit more detail to explain how they work and stack up a bit better. So you've got the nature recovery payment, which is available where woodland creation will expand areas of existing native woodland, create areas of new native woodland, or expand habitat for red squirrel populations. The water quality payment is available where woodland creation will help reduce pollutants through land use change that reduces fertiliser application, or by creating woodland that intercepts pollution and sediment before it reaches watercourses. The reduced flood risk payment is available where woodland creation can help reduce the risk of flooding, and the riparian buffer payment is available where the creation of native broadleaf woodland along watercourses will improve habitats, so to keep rivers cool. The close to settlements payment is available where woodland creation will provide social and environmental benefits by being close to people, and the access payment is there to provide where woodland provides new long-term permissive access through recreation. Eligibility through these is based on the location and design of the new woodland, but you're able to claim multiple layers, adding up the total value of the woodland planting. So back to the woodland carbon code. This is basically the new quality assurance standard for woodland creation. So we all know that trees absorb carbon out of the atmosphere, of which then can be sold on the carbon market, and 1 tonne of CO2 is equivalent to 1 unit. A new native woodland can capture between 300 and 400 tonnes of CO2 per hectare by its year 50. The selling of the carbon is captured by the Woodland Carbon Code, which is a national register and validates and verifies the carbon units your woodland sequester. The carbon units, when sold, can then generate an income for the landowner between £7 and £21 per unit, depending on the current market at the time. However, the carbon market trading on the open market can be risky and fluctuate rapidly, which is where the Woodland Carbon Guarantee comes in. The Woodland Carbon Guarantee provides the landowner with the option to sell the captured carbon in the form of woodland carbon units to the government for a guaranteed price every 5 to 10 years up to 2056, which provides additional long-term income to a woodland owner. The Woodland Carbon Guarantee also doesn't prevent the landowner from selling on the open market for a better price at any time, so it's a win-win with an extra bit of security. So as the Forestry Commission, we pride ourselves in being government forestry experts, providing financial support and advice on woodland creation and an array of other forestry related matters. The Forestry Commission are able to offer guidance on site assessments and opportunities by experts, including local woodland officers, woodland creation officers, ecologists, historic environment advisors, and landscape advisors, and business development advisors. We offer an opportunity mapping and research for larger schemes or partnerships, and we are the woodland management experts. We are the regulator for felling licenses, environmental impact assessments, plant health and deer management. And the Forestry Commission works closely with other organisations and are always happy to signpost and help find the right support and the right grant for you. Thank you very much. That's all from me.
Emma, thanks so much. Really, really clear. And I'm sure that, well, there's already some questions coming to the chat, so we'll be coming back to you. I have no doubt after we've heard from everybody. But just on the Q&A, if you could just keep posting those questions in the chat. We're answering them here live, but just remember that many people will be watching this back. So if you have got questions, we will be coming back to some common themes at the end of the session once we've heard from everybody as well. So just keep popping those questions in, as many as you can. That would be great. So I think it's very clear, I think, so far that this project's never going to happen if it's not going to work in partnership with farmers and landowners. So one of the very early calls we made when we were scoping this project was to talk to the CLA and the NFU just to see how we could kind of shore up that partnership with landowners and think from their perspective what was important. So I'm delighted that we've got Graham Clark from the CLA to talk to us about how, as landowners, you can make informed decisions about woodland creation. So Graham, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Roger. I will just try to get my screen to share. Hopefully you can hear me and see my slides. Okay. Oh. I've now lost my slides. Can you see them? Everything's gone black.
No, it's all gone black.
You may be at the end of the slideshow, Graham. Don't know.
Right, I am at the end of the slideshow. Bear with me a second. Right, okay. Okay, right. Thank you, Roger. My name's Graham Clark, as Roger said, and I cover forestry and energy for the CLA. And two really good presentations so far. One from Will, just outlining the Severn Treescapes project, and then Emma's on the work of the Forestry Commission and their grants, both essential information. I'm going to take a bit of a step back and talk about some of the key issues that a landowner farmer should consider before committing land to trees and woodland. So what's my talk going to be about? It's really about making the right choices for you and your land. Government obviously want to expand tree cover, and Severn Treescapes is part of that, and there's lots of good reasons why we should do that. But as we said before, trees don't work everywhere. Every holding is unique, and if you're going to be creating woodland, that needs to be compatible with your existing land uses and enterprises on the land and your business objectives. So it does really need some consideration as to whether you're going to do this, and if so, where you're going to do it and how you go about it. So I've put at the bottom of the slide there, good decisions are informed decisions, and vice versa. So I'm just going to cover in the next 10 minutes or so some of the key considerations that a landowner should think about before committing land to trees. So what am I going to cover in that? I'm going to cover the importance of having clear objectives. I'm going to talk a little bit about the permanence of woodland creation in this country. I'll then talk about the change in the income profile from the land that you've now converted to woodland, essentially the loss of annual income from agriculture, which might be able to be made up in different ways. I'll then go on to talk about a little bit about carbon credits, because it's quite a complex area, quite an emerging area, and just some points to bear in mind about that. I'll also talk about the need for advice, which is really important with this to make the best choices, I think, and proper planning of a new woodland. There's quite a bit involved, and you need to think about that. And then I might just say some overall comments about the processes associated with grants, because it can get quite involved. Okay, so firstly, my apologies, I've got ahead of myself. How do I go back? Natalie, can you hear? How do I get back on full screen to the previous slide?
If you just click the arrow to the left, Graham, does that work?
No.
Maybe you might be better to just stop sharing and reshare.
Okay. Bear with me a minute. My apologies, everybody. Right. Okay, clear objectives. We've heard from Emma already, and a bit from Will too, that trees and woodlands can do many things for us. Timber and wood fuel supply, screening, shelter, shade, flood management, etc. There's lots of different things and reasons that they can do, different things they can do, and different reasons to plant them. But I think it's really important to take a step back and think, well, what is it you want to achieve through on the land through the planting of trees, creation of woodland? You might have multiple objectives. That's perfectly feasible. But I think clarifying, just knowing specifically what objectives you have will help you with choices later on in the process when it comes to siting of trees and woodland planting, how you're going to design that, the species mix that you'll use, how you might go about establishing those, the density, etc., how you're going to manage it going forward. So I think clarity of objectives is really important. Secondly, I'm having some trouble with my slides again.
Graham, do you want me to share my slides? Would that help?
I'll try stop sharing again and go back in. Okay. Right. Secondly, after clarity of objectives, permanence. I think this is a really important point because you may be aware of this, but some may not be. But once we create woodland in this country, there's an expectation that it will be retained. So the Forestry Act 1967 is the sort of bedrock of that. We can plant woodland, we can harvest woodland and use it for timber, but there is a felling license regime. It's a regulated, the taking down of trees is a regulated activity through the felling license regime. And when you get a felling license from the Forestry Commission, there is usually restocking obligations that are attached to that. So essentially, woodland creation is an irreversible decision. That's less so when it comes to individual trees or hedgerow trees, and certainly in agroforestry situations, government are looking at clarifying or relaxing the requirement of permanence in relation to agroforestry lines of trees, which we may hear about from Ben later on. But certainly when it comes to woodland creation, you need to be aware that it's essentially a permanent land use change. So that's not to say that you shouldn't do it. There's very good reasons why we should, but we just do need to be clear about where it's suitable and not to put it in the wrong place. Now, the third thing is that once we create woodland, we're essentially changing the income profile. If that land is currently agricultural, then we're losing the agricultural annual income unless we're doing an agroforestry trees as well as agriculture, which would retain some agricultural income. But essentially, woodland creation means loss of the annual agricultural income from that land. And although we can get now very attractive capital grants through things like the England Woodland Creation Offer through the Forestry Commission, those capital grants are essentially, they cover the capital costs. So you shouldn't really view that as income. It's covering the capital costs and the maintenance for the first 10 years or so to establish the woodland. So when we look at those sums and some of the additional contributions that Emma went into, that can look, the numbers can look very attractive if we're looking at it over the establishment phase, the first 10 years. But we need to look beyond that and consider that once we create woodland, it's a permanent land use change. So we need to factor in or balance the permanent land use change and loss of agricultural income on that land against what the grant scheme income sums can bring in. So it's not something to do without factoring in the wider land use across the holding, because any timber income from the project, that's, even if it's softwoods, that's at least 40 years away. It's going to be the next generation probably that would yield any income from timber. And any thinnings income that might accrue during the period. Often that's doesn't always cover the cost of the operations. So that needs to be factored into. Carbon income, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, that's possible on top as well. So I'll say a few words about carbon credits now. So the voluntary carbon markets is a potentially new revenue stream that we didn't have before. And that offers potentially, say, 5 yearly income, or indeed in some circumstances, an upfront capitalised sum from the sale of carbon credits when you create new woodland. So it's not in relation to existing woodland. You only generate these carbon credits, which can be sold for money when you create new woodland. You can't currently get them for existing woodland that's already there. And the buyers in this market, the people who would pay you the money for these carbon credits, they are businesses that need or want to offset their emissions or enhance their green credentials, or it could be the government through the Woodland Carbon Guarantee Scheme. The thing that I would say about this is, something worth considering, but there are costs attached to working up a project and putting it through the UK Woodland Carbon Code. It costs money to put a project together and cost out the carbon which it will sequester. It also locks you into a verification process every 5 or 10 years into the future to determine how much carbon has been sequestered, and that costs money that needs to be sort of netted off against the income that can come from it. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. I just think that people need to factor in the costs of going through the process. And for smaller woodlands, and I've put a figure of 10 hectares there, but certainly ones of a few acres or so, it's marginal because of the costs involved, whether or not at current carbon prices of, say, round figures £20 a tonne, whether this is worth doing for smaller woodland creation. So that's something that needs to be borne in mind too. The other thing that I would say is that once you've sold something, whether it's carbon credits or not, it's essentially, it's not yours anymore. Someone else owns it. You may need those sorts of credits, carbon credits within the business for your own purposes to offset your own unavoidable emissions in future years. Now, that's not a statutory requirement right now, but it's something that, I would say that landowners need to consider these things in the round and not make rash decisions about those sorts of things. Next key consideration, I think, is the importance of advice. There's quite a bit to think about if you're creating a new woodland, not only where you would put it, but what sort of species you would put into the mix, what your objectives would be, which would clarify what you would do, how much is it all going to cost, what are the potential implications on the wider landscape or natural habitats or water supplies, whatever. So there's quite a bit to think about. So I think it's really important to take the advice that's available from various sources, and that could be directly through the Severn Treescapes project, or indeed signposting to the Forestry Commission. They've got woodland creation officers who are well placed, and it's good practice to engage with them at an early stage to get their buy-in to the design of what you're doing. Just tap into those advice sources before deciding what the best route for you is. And those initial advice on options, going through the different grant schemes, etc., that can help you clarify what your objectives are, but it's distinct from actually paying an advisor to work up a detailed woodland creation plan. So there's the initial advice on what might be suitable, and that's a useful thing, a useful process to go through. But it's distinct from engaging someone and paying them to put your application to the Forestry Commission to work up your detailed proposal. And I think I've had conversations with members before where it's not been, they haven't really nailed down exactly what the expectations are from the advisor. So I would just clarify that with the various advisors at different stages as to what you expect from them and the timescales, and so that everybody knows exactly where they are. The other thing to say here is if you're creating woodland, is to match the species that you're looking to plant with the site factors and the soils. And there's a really useful online advisory tool called Ecological Site Classification, which is freely available. It helps you settle on what might be a useful or suitable species mix for each particular site based on the geographical factors. And also that factors in climate change, because the kind of trees that have grown in a particular place over the last 100 years won't necessarily be the ones that will grow the best over the next 100 years in a changed climate. So that's worth bearing in mind too. Related to that, the importance of proper planning. I said a minute ago, there's quite a bit involved in planning a new woodland. If we're going to create a new woodland of a few acres, that's going to impact on existing habitats or landscape setting or the historic environment. And all of that needs to be assessed for its significance. So there's a bit of stakeholder, you need to consult with statutory bodies and also neighbours as far as impact on views or private water supplies or things like that. And those sorts of any stakeholder concerns that are raised during that process should really be factored into the design of what you do going forward. And certainly through the process for the England Woodland Creation Offer grant, the Forestry Commission would expect to see evidence of that engagement. It's really, it's good practice, and it essentially designs out any objections from the beginning. So it is quite a good process to go through. And if you're creating a woodland of over 5 hectares, as Emma said earlier on, there's the Woodland Creation Planning Grant that helps you with the costs of that consultation too. So I'm nearly done. Just a few comments on grant processes. Creation of woodland can get a bit involved. It can easily take 6 months or so to go through the whole process. Sometimes longer. So it's not something that can just be done sort of overnight. And you need to sort of factor that into your expectations. It's a seasonal activity, planting of trees. So, we need to factor that into, sometimes we can miss planting windows. So we're coming to the end of the planting window for this season. So that's quite an important factor as well. And previously I've had conversations with members who've been frustrated with going through the grant process. And sometimes they've not included some information that they perhaps should have, which the Forestry Commission would then send the application back to gather that information. And sometimes timescales can slip. So I would advise just bearing all of that sort of thing in mind as well. The other thing to say is to plan the cash flow. Grant schemes usually pay out on after the expenses incurred basis. So plan the cash flow accordingly. And then last slide, what we're talking about here is a long-term commitment. So once we've planted the trees, that's not the end of the process. In many ways, it's the beginning of a long-term commitment to manage those new woodlands. And in order to sort of brigade all the tasks and the timescales associated with that, it would be good practice to have a woodland management plan going forward. So that's something to factor into your thinking too. And as part of that, you need to think about grey squirrel control, because they can undo an awful lot of good work unless they're managed, and same with deer. And potential collaboration with neighbours on those things is worth factoring in too. So hopefully that's been a good sort of run through some of the key things that you need to think about before you plant a new woodland. And I'll hand back to Roger.
Graham, thank you. A really sometimes sobering, but like really helpful list of decisions to step through, a sort of checklist, if you like, to make before we landed on making that decision. Really helpful. Thank you. We do, as you mentioned, actually, we do know that trees and have been part of productive landscapes for many years. Especially in this area, I guess we're the heart of orchard production in the UK, and that still feels like it's you go back to the 50s maps, it was a much bigger part of our history, but they're still there. But we've also had mention of hedgerows, and we've talked about in the past about wood pasture. But one of the issues that's come up for a lot of the conversations we've had with landowners so far is an interest in a newer initiative. I mean, I guess not so new in its origins around agroforestry. So I'm really pleased that one of the things that first turned me on to agroforestry was going to see Helen Browning's agroforestry plantation in Wiltshire, and I think, Ben, you were project manager there, but really inspirational. So Ben, I'm really delighted we've got you here to walk us through agroforestry, which is new territory for many of us. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Roger, and yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be contributing to this really good project. So as Roger mentioned, as well as the work I do at the Soil Association, I manage the tree planting at Helen Browning's farm, which is a 1,500-acre farm in Wiltshire. My background is commercial horticulture, so I'm sort of very much coming from the farming side of things into trees, and I think recognise the power that they have, not just in terms of climate and environment, but to improve farming productivity and resilience. So that's sort of really where my passion is at the moment. Let's see if I can get my slides to move on. There we go. So in terms of what agroforestry actually is, there's even these sort of experts that have been doing it for decades still can't always agree on exactly what it is. Is one tree in a field agroforestry? Is a hedge agroforestry? I don't tend to worry too much about that. The way I look at it is I see agroforestry as the deliberate integration of trees into farming. So I think historically, and certainly in recent history, trees have been seen as very separate. You have your woodland and you have your farm, or and the two might sort of meet somewhere at the edge, but they're not thought of as the same thing. And trees for farmers have been, at best, as something that sits on the side of their farm. At worst, they're a problem. They're a cost. They're something that gets in the way. You have to drive your tractors around them when they're in the field, and you have to spend money flailing hedges, and there's no perceived benefit of those trees. And I think that's where agroforestry can change that conversation and start to try and articulate and demonstrate the benefits that trees can have to the farm. And this is sort of the basic concept, really, is it's maximizing the use of what's available to you as a farmer. So your land, once you've bought it, is a sort of free resource in one sense, and then we have free sunshine and we have free water, and a lot of that is currently wasted in farming. If you have bare soil, that's wasted sunlight that is hitting soil and reflecting up into the air. You want everything to be covered and green. The more your soil can absorb and let infiltrate, the more you're making use of that water. And trees do that very well. So typically, what you see above ground on a plant is what is below ground. So if you've got 3 centimeters of grass, you're likely to have a fairly short root system underneath, whereas a 60-foot tree will have, as shown in this diagram, lots of root underneath. And while there is competition, obviously, particularly sort of where the two meet, overall, these systems are more productive. And there's this term, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, called land equivalent ratio, which is a way of trying to articulate that increase in productivity. So as a hypothetical example here, you grow a hectare of walnuts and you have your target yield of that, and you grow a hectare of wheat and you have a target yield. If you then sort of mix up those crops on the hectare, you might imagine that you would just get half of one and half of the other, or 60% of one and 40 the other. And actually what tends to happen is you get a little bit more than half of both of them. So you end up typically with 30 or 40% more productivity. Now, of course, that's productivity in terms of biomass. So you still then have to translate that into an increase in income or financial viability. So that's where it gets complicated. And I think particularly in the UK, where we're still relatively new to this in its modern term, we don't have all the economical evidence to prove for lots of different crops and combinations sort of what is more profitable and what isn't. So there's definitely a job to be done in terms of researching and demonstrating which systems work really well in the UK. And I think broadly speaking, that increase in productivity is quite straightforward to demonstrate in livestock systems and harder to do when you mix trees with cropping. So there are a whole range of different agroforestry systems. Broadly speaking, they sort of tend to be called silver arable, which is trees and crops, or silver horticultural, and silver pastoral, where you mix them with livestock. And you know, as you can see from sort of the not at all exhaustive pictures there, there's lots of different ways that you can put trees into the system, and I'll go through some of them in a bit. And I thought it was worth, I mean, I know some of the other speakers have touched on the benefits of trees. I thought I might just do a little bit of this from a productivity point of view. So we know that including trees into the system will or can improve soil health and nutrition. And there's a number of ways that happens. One is that they can mine nutrients from deeper in the soil. So if you imagine tree roots going down 2 or 3 meters, they're pulling nutrients up through their system into the leaves, which they then drop onto the surface of the soil, and that gets incorporated into the higher levels, and that's then available for your crop to use. And by building the soil organic matter generally, they're sort of bringing all of those benefits that a higher soil organic matter can bring. And you know, particularly things like fungi. You know, we know how important fungi is in terms of soil health, and having trees within the system will certainly help to improve that. And we know that that fungi can help the movement of nutrients around the soil as well. And particularly, you know, one of the great things about this project and that interconnectivity that it's trying to achieve, you know, the more you can link up all of these groups of trees, the more those nutrients can get shared very widely. And we know that the fungal networks are sort of the things that allow that transport of nutrients from really quite a long way away that could then be available for your crops or your grass. So big motivation for Helen at her farm is improving animal health and welfare. Most of our domesticated animals come from a woodland or woodland edge. Originally, that's sort of where they were bred from, and they're happier there. In this instance, obviously, they're sort of pecking away. They're getting lots of nutrition from that diverse plant and increased soil life. They're safe from predators, and that's particularly for the smaller animals. And there's even studies showing that there is increased positive interactions between animals, and even between animals and humans, when there are trees present. So I think, rather like me, lots of animals just like being around trees. There's potential benefits both to the health of the tree and the crop. So, you know, trees are fantastic for bringing in biodiversity, and often that means increasing pollinators and predators. We're actually working on a project at the moment specifically around assessing the potential of trees as pollinators within agroforestry systems, linking up to that ecological site classification that Graham mentioned. So, you know, when choosing a tree for your agroforestry system, there might be a tool available in the future that can help you assess how good that's going to be for pollinators. And one of the project partners is obsessed with Manuka, which is sort of the gold standard in terms of pollination. But then also, by spreading out your trees, your trees might well be healthier too. So we know in orchards, for instance, that, densely planted trees of the same species allow very fast transmission of disease. If you spread that out in an agroforestry system, you increase the wind flow and therefore reduce potentially the fungal burden on those trees. And scab, for instance, we know is less prevalent in diverse, widely spaced systems. These are both pictures from the UK. The top one, I think, is southwest England. It's a field of just harvested maize on a slope, no soil protection, and as you can see, half of the field is ending up on the road down the drain. So a few trees across that would certainly help to slow the flow, increase the infiltration, and protect the soil and the environment. The lower one is not just an out of focus blurry shot, it's soil being blown across, and that's over in the east of England. And those of you who've come across Stephen Briggs will know that one of his motivations for planting his agroforestry system was just to slow the wind down and keep his soil on the farm. So, protecting that asset, without your soil, what are you going to grow? You want to hold on to it, you want to keep it on your farm, and you want to keep it in good heart. And using trees to slow down winds, to slow down the potential of water running off the farm is a great way of doing it. And then I guess the final one really is around resilience. This is a horticultural agroforestry system in Berkshire, in Tolhurst. He's a vegetable grower. He's planted fruit and timber trees, but then he's even into planting those with productive, in this case, rhubarb. He's growing daffodils. So it's this very multi-layered, complex system, and it builds resilience of soil and against climate. And certainly, again, at the farm at Eastbrook, we're really keen to protect the farm against the potential extreme weather that's coming, but also to be growing things that diversify the income. So if one thing doesn't work one year, we've got something else that will pop up and make us some money. So it makes it more complicated. It makes it harder to manage potentially, but it also reduces the risk of you losing everything in any one year. So I thought briefly just giving some examples of how you might implement tree planting on farms that isn't woodland. And obviously I love woodland, and woodland in some situations is great, but it's a much bigger decision to take a block of your farm or field out of production, put it into a woodland, than to either tweak the way you're managing your existing trees or put in smaller areas or alleys. So as an example, you might have something that looks a little bit like that on the left, which is not really doing anything very much for anybody. But with a change of management, it could turn into something that looked like what we've got on the right. So moving from an annual flailing to a 10-year coppicing cycle, for instance, could provide you with a really useful asset in terms of whether it's wood fuel or wood chip, for instance, from the hedgerow. But also in the 10 years in between, you've got this incredible resource that might provide browse and pollinators and all the rest of it. And then you might have a hedge that you want to then bulk up. So in the example on the left, there's quite a nice little hedge on the left, but you might want to then plant something a bit bigger to make that more effective, either as a shelter for livestock or to slow the wind down for a crop. And on the right is where we've planted a 5-row shelter belt on the left to try and sort of protect the newly planted agroforestry system, but also we've got the prevailing winds coming from the left, so we're just trying to slow that down a little bit. And there's a brook that runs up along the left of that photo as well, so it's a bit of a riparian planting. Grazed woodlands is a huge opportunity in my view, and although not necessarily the focus for today, there's an opportunity for using existing woodlands and bringing livestock into them. So, agroforestry is not always about planting more trees. Sometimes it's about making better use of the trees that you've got. So the top left is where we've planted under a woodland creation scheme. We've planted what will be a grazed woodland, we hope, in 10-15 years time. Then you've got a kind of sort of more like a typical grazed woodland type situation on the left, bottom left, with lots of nice cover, but also quite a bit of open grass, giving the stock the chance to move in and out of different systems, right through to something that's a bit denser on the right. And one of the, there was a good point made earlier about the ability to still have an income in agroforestry systems as opposed to potentially woodland, and there's a myth in a way that you plant trees and you lose all of your productivity under them, and there's a lot of evidence showing that most forage species actually grow pretty well even at sort of 40-50% shade. In fact, sometimes better than in full sun. And particularly in very hot, dry years, you'll know that the only green bits you see are under the trees. So actually, you can get this sort of real boost in productivity by integrating them. And browsing blocks, this is something we're trialing at the farm in Wiltshire. We haven't yet gotten to a point where we're getting to work, but the idea is you plant up quite a dense mix of very palatable species. So we're trialing poplar, willow and mulberry, and they're in a little corner, effectively, ours are anyway, and what we want to do is get them to the point where we can bring the stock in to sort of graze straight from the tree for a short period of time. So probably a day or two we'll bring the stock in, sort of mob graze the trees almost, and then pull them out again and allow them to regrow. And one of the things that sort of I don't think was covered by previous speakers was some of the nutritional benefits of livestock eating trees. There's higher micronutrient levels, higher tannins, which can reduce internal parasites. So there's lots of benefits to including a proportion of browse within a livestock diet. But again, last year during the drought period, in some of our fields, the only things that were green were the trees. So at a point where you might have run out of grass for the stock, you might still be able to feed them on tree browse. And then I guess this is, what a lot of people perhaps think of when we talk of agroforestry, is these alleys of trees. And this certainly suits tree species where you want to manage them a bit more intensively. So fruit and nuts work very well in this system, but we're also trialing timber. The top left is our farm at Eastbrook. You can see there the Perry pears are the ones in the tall white tubes, and we've interplanted them with willow, alder and sea buckthorn, and the spacing there is 27 meters between the rows of trees. So you've got this sort of quite big paddock in between, which we can then rotationally graze the stock in. And we're also now trialing some direct drilling of cereals in between those. And one of the things actually with the soil that I didn't mention, this field that on the left is called Withy Pump. It's quite a wet field, and one of the things we're really hoping is to be able to sort of remove a bit of the moisture through the tree planting. And again, there's lots of evidence that you can extend your growing season and your grazing season with the inclusion of trees. It tends to make the soil a bit warmer and the soil a bit drier. So it's quite often you can get your stock out maybe a month earlier or 2 weeks earlier than you would have done, and the same at the end of the season. So there's real opportunities for making better use of land. And then the one at the bottom right is Farm Ed in Gloucestershire. That's a very newly planted row. And we're using, by the way, sorry, on the left, we're using single strand electric fencing, mains fencing, and then they've got a slightly different system of fencing on the right, which is temporary with 4 strands. And yeah, we spend an awful lot of time talking about fencing and the relative benefits and costs of it all. So yeah, definitely a topic for another conversation. And then finally, it was really just sort of come back to this point about choosing what to grow. And Graham was very right in talking about making sure you get your objectives clear. But effectively, you can have any tree and any livestock and any crop can be integrated potentially. But that's a massive choice. When Helen first came and said, right, let's plant some trees on 200 acres. It's like, oh, okay, what should we plant? So really tying down your main objectives and working out, you know, do you want to spend a lot of time processing a nut crop, you know, or actually do you just want something that you can wood chip and use as bedding on the farm? So understanding how much time and effort you want to put into your trees and the management of it. And what, you know, who else might be around to do it? I think there's some huge opportunities for new entrants around agroforestry, and sort of bringing new skills and people in. So that's me. Thank you very much. There's a few links there. I can copy them into the chat as well. Just also to mention the Fabulous Farmers Project, which is a European funded project that's funding a lot of the stuff we're doing on agroforestry. And we've started an Agroforestry UK Facebook page, which you can join, and there's some various local networks that we're supporting as well. So I'll also stick my email in the chat, so if you do want to get in touch with me, then do. And I would highly recommend joining the Farm Woodland Forum if you're more interested in sort of getting some more information on agroforestry. And just a tiny plug for my wood chip handbook, if any of you are interested in using wood chip more. Thank you. So back to you, Roger, and the Q&A.
Great, Ben. Thank you. While you're still around, there are a couple of questions, Ben, specific to you, actually. I wonder if we might cover some of those off.
Yeah,
one really interesting one around cross-contamination, about someone mentioning that you talked a bit about dual cropping of wheat and walnuts, and someone saying that they'd had some experience where a wheat buyer wasn't interested in the crop because of potential with cross-contamination with nuts. Have you come across that elsewhere? Has that been a risk?
Well, funny enough, only last week was the first time I'd come across it. So yes, it is. I think with nuts particularly, it is an issue. And there was, I think, one farmer had to demonstrate to their buyer where every nut tree on the farm was. I mean, they only had a few, but yes, there's definitely some buyers that are very, very nervous about any trace of nut in a crop. So that would be something that when you looked at your objectives for tree planting, you would say, okay, well, clearly nuts are not an option for us, and we'll go for something else. But yeah,
great. And another, while you're on the floor, is kind of just another set of really interesting questions just about, I mean, maybe the resources you put up at the end cover this, but I guess people are looking for, in the same way that Graham went through some of those kind of pros and cons in terms of the economic case, are there resources that quantify the economic argument around agroforestry? And the person in the chat has mentioned, as you did, just as they posted actually, some of that nutritional benefit from browsing hedgerows that might reduce in lower feed and vet bills, for example, or livestock productivity through better use of shade.
so
great to see those pictures of cattle in the woodland. But is there an economic case around that?
Yeah, so there certainly is, and there's lots of studies. So we produced the Agroforestry Handbook, which, although there's no hard copies left, is still available to download from our website, which has got quite a lot of links to some of that stuff. Although, you know, that was 5 years ago, so there's new stuff since then. There's a couple of links that I'll put in around some other European agroforestry projects that have got some really good resources. There's what I think we don't have, you know, so there's lots of studies looking at individual things. So whether that's, you know, nutritional benefits, or the reduction of lamb mortality, for instance, when they're shaded by trees. There's lots of things that will show you certain things. They're often not in this country. And so some of them will be comparable, but some of them might not. You know, so a study from Australia showing the benefits of giving them shade, you know, actually might not be very relevant if you're in the Wye Valley growing, you know, and it's wetter, but whereas others will be very relevant. I think what we don't really have is a comprehensive one place that you can go to find all of this stuff. We've done a online agroforestry learning course that you can access through our website as well, which is free if you've got a Welsh postcode, and there's a small administrative charge if not. So, you know, if you're sort of at the beginning of the journey, then I would say the handbook and the online learning course are a great place to start. But yeah, there is lots of stuff, but it's a little bit disparate, I think, for some of it. So
And thank you. That's super useful and a really clear kind of walkthrough, actually, really helpful. Great. Well, we have some time. Thank you for all of those of you who put questions into the Q&A box. Do keep them coming. We've got a little bit of time left just to kind of answer some of the sort of more common questions I think that have come through in the Q&A, and do keep posting, because we can answer the questions kind of after the webinar has ended as well, so don't worry about kind of getting them in now. But there are a couple of themes, and as well as our panelists, we've got a few other people in the mix, representatives, other folk from Forestry Commission and the CLA, but also other folk from the NFU and from the Wildlife Trust as well. So I'm going to see who's up for asking some. Predictably, the questions are the trickiest ones, so it'll be interesting to see who's going to kind of put their hands up. But there's some themes I've just been looking at. There's definitely a theme, I think, in the questions around stacking, and the stacking between UCO and carbon credits, UCO and existing stewardship, UCO and potential elm stuff. And I wonder who's brave enough to tackle. Andrew, you've been doing some brilliant responding on that. I wonder, do you want to have a go at this kind of just a kind of, I think we addressed it in some detail in Emma's presentation, but actually just a kind of simple run through about the principles of stacking would be helpful, Emma or Andrew, to have a go at.
Hi everybody. Yeah, must confess I had to do a little bit of research to some of those questions. It is quite complicated because there are a lot of offers available. With regards to carbon credits, they are definitely stackable with Forestry Commission grants. And in fact, we encourage people to enter into carbon credit schemes when they're applying for things like the England Woodland Creation Offer. So yeah, that definitely is stackable. It gets a bit more complicated when we're thinking about things like countryside stewardship. But what I would say is, with regards to Forestry Commission grants, particularly the England Woodland Creation Offers, we've got a really good, very comprehensive manual. And if you just Google UCO grant manual, it will go through all of the eligibility rules and how they are compatible with things like countryside stewardship. It looks like, from what I've just been reading, that essentially if you agree to leave a countryside stewardship agreement within 6 months of your application for UCO, then you would still be eligible to apply for it. With regards to other grants, for instance, if you're getting trees from the Woodland Trust, as far as I'm aware, there is no contradiction between using their grants and using ours to create woodland. However, if you're trying to plant trees on land that's already got tree cover, you may well not be eligible for a Forestry Commission grant, because we tend to look for areas where there's no tree cover currently, or hasn't been for a while. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and just and I think Juliet, on this point, I think you've got your hand up. So Juliet Hines, who came up with the idea of Severn Treescapes, actually, I think you wanted to come up on this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention biodiversity net gain, which is coming in November as part of the planning and development system to offset biodiversity that might not be able to be mitigated for on a new building site. Some of that can potentially be stacked with some grants. Severn Trent, for example, have told us that biodiversity net gain could be stacked with their legacy, Commonwealth legacy grant at the moment. It's all sort of early days with those things, so that's one of the things that we're trying to explore through the project, is how can we stack things like biodiversity net gain with some of the existing grant schemes. But I think essentially you can't double fund things, so two schemes or two sort of funding sources won't pay for the same thing, but it's whether it's offering to pay for another element of the, say, the maintenance for longer and that sort of thing. So one of the things that we need to explore through this project.
Yeah, and I think stacking is one of those words that I don't think we used in this context a few years ago, and now it's kind of, we're obsessed by it. So Graham, you wanted to come in on this one too.
Yeah, I'd just reiterate what was just said there by Juliet. Government tends to work on the principle that if their money is involved, then stacking of different government income streams for the same action is out. You can't do that. They won't pay for the same specific action twice, which has a certain logic to it. And you, in this context, that's essentially the word that you'll hear invoked a lot is additionality, which is built into the bricks of the Woodland Carbon Code, for example. And as far as stacking is concerned, it really depends on being able to sort of access different income streams for the same project on the same land is tricky. And Andrew said a minute ago, you can stack carbon credit income alongside UCO grant income, and that's fine. But the way that the rules for these different schemes, particularly with biodiversity net gain, are still emerging. So the compatibility of getting a UCO grant and carbon credit and biodiversity net gain on the same piece of land for the same project, that starts to get problematic because you get into additionality issues. And just very recently, just last week, I believe, there is some more detailed guidance on biodiversity net gain that has just been issued, which I haven't actually read yet. But yeah, I would say as far as stacking is concerned, read the small print of the individual scheme.
Yeah, good advice, Graham. Ben, you had your hand up as well on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't cover the grant side so much. I mean, one of the things I would say in terms of agroforestry is that a lot of the current woodland schemes are not yet that suitable. Some of them specifically exclude being able to farm or graze underneath them, so you've got to be a little bit careful. And the UCO, while it is great grant, for small areas, which a lot of the agroforestry will be, it's still an awful lot of work. It's quite a complicated application form, and we sort of got a bit put off in terms of one of our smaller bits. But then sort of in terms of that stacking bit, there's some quite interesting things where I've seen farmers put in the wildflower strip, for instance, with the countryside stewardship, and then use that strip to plant their trees into. So, you can be quite inventive sort of around some of the existing stuff. And obviously we hope there's the new SFIs for agroforestry plan to come in next year. So we're hoping there will be so much more tailored agroforestry stuff. But I would say it's one of the good things about some, what I've heard in terms of this project, and having those informed officers on the ground to support you, they'll be able to keep track of this stuff because it is changing so quickly. It's hard to get you, to know exactly what's available at any one time. So.
Yeah, no, good point, Ben. I've got a couple of other people. I've also want to move on to some other areas, actually. So Will and Will, you wanted to come in. I want to move on to small bits of holdings as well. So, but Will, did you have something else on stacking?
Well, it was actually probably what you're going to come on to, Roger. So I was going to talk about those smaller landowners or those smaller areas of land. Also, they're people we want to have conversations with as well.
Yeah.
So will be grants that will be applicable for those ones that might fall through the gaps of other schemes.
Okay, well, let me just lay it. I mean, I think there's a theme in the chat around either small areas of holdings. I think Jamie's talked about, he's got 3 hectares on a steep slope. It's kind of interesting. There's other people talking about kind of reviving derelict or bits of on the perimeters, how they might kind of revive them. I think there's some conversations previously in the chat about hedgerows, and I think Andrew, you put helpfully something in the chat about the SFI link, but Emma, you covered this quite a lot in your presentation about that minimum amount, and I wonder if just kind of clearly quite a lot of interest amongst attendees today about how can we kind of pull together relatively small expansion of woodland areas on farm, and what support's available for that. Who wants to have a go at that first? Emma, you had some quite useful stats around the kind of merging of different parcels, didn't you? Do you want to kind of go back to that first, and then we might come back to hedgerows as well?
Yeah, so within UCO, so it's a minimum application of 1 hectare, but it doesn't have to be a 1 hectare plot. So the application in total is 1 hectare. Within that, it is mostly, well, it can be as small as 0.1 hectare with a 20-metre width, but in some cases, for instance, you know, riparian strips and things like that, they can actually go down to a 10-metre width within the 0.1 hectare. But what we do also tell landowners is that the application is a hectare minimum. So for instance, we do have a couple of applications which will be shared between 2 landowners to make up to that 1 hectare application size. So that's generally how UCO goes. And then you've got the woodland, woodland creation planning grant, which is a minimum of 5 hectares. The same as UCO, you've got as long as it's 0.1 hectare with a 20-metre width. And then you've got the riparian strips, which can be slightly smaller in some cases as well. So that's generally how our applications go. But it is, as everyone said, it's about right tree, right place, you know, for the right reasons. So we do look at, you know, type of tree in the landscaping as well, and how those little strips and pockets are planted.
Really helpful, Emma, thank you. The other bit of that question, I guess, was around enhancing hedgerows, and Ben, you had some cracking pictures around, you know, there are hedgerows and hedgerows in terms of their value in terms of a wooded landscape. I wonder if I think there was some criticism, I think rightly in my view, around the SFI payment rates around hedgerow creation. Anyone got anything else to add in on the hedgerow, other sources of income to kind of boost hedgerow planting or enhance hedgerow planting? Anyone up for that one?
I can add a little bit to what I said earlier, Roger, if that's helpful, which, I mean, the Organic Research Centre did a really good project looking at hedges and the sort of financials of managing them and the output of them, particularly around wood chip as it happens, but that's not the only, you know, the nice thing about using them for wood chip is it's because they're, you know, they're likely to be low grade timber, you know, not apart from probably some wood fuel, you're not going to get anything particularly valuable. But if you can find a quick, easy way of coppicing and, you know, and then using the wood chip, particularly if you're using it on farm, it can become cost neutral. Whereas obviously at the moment, flailing is a net loss, you know, you're not getting really any benefit, but you've got to pay. So I would recommend finding there's 3 reports I think that the RC produced on that, and there's some really good research on it,
and a very good book on wood chip, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah.
Will, you want to come on?
Too much.
Yeah, just quickly on hedgerows, that there are a number of grants that are accessible for either planting up new hedgerows or gapping up old hedgerows, and some do one and not the other, and some are happy with both. So, and also we're happy to advise on management of hedgerows as well. So somebody got a good question in the chat about managing existing trees on farms.
Yeah, the one I wanted to finish on, I think one of the other big themes in the chat, and so probably the last question we've got time for today, and the responses on the answer questions are really great on this, but just on carbon credits. So clearly, I mean, partly because it's a very young market, it's developing quite quickly now, but it's clearly quite a lot of concern and questions around carbon credits. And interesting, some questions around timing, and I just wondered if anyone, I'm sure all the panelists have been having a check-in on the questions that are being asked on carbon, but that seems to me the biggest area where there's a bit of confusion. Graham, you tackled this a little bit in yours, and I guess it still feels like a moving target, despite the fact that the Woodland Carbon Code is probably the most advanced of any UK habitats in terms of carbon credits. But anything just to say, I mean, I think the chat answers are super helpful, so thanks to everyone who's done that, but anything to say around that clarifying of the carbon code and how that stacks with other benefits as well?
Yeah, I wish I could be more definitive in clarifying some of this, but actually this is such a new market that there are some fundamentals not just surrounding it, but you know, in the bricks of it, which just haven't been settled yet. You know, some issues of property rights, you know, the encumbrance that may come with selling carbon credits to a third party on land which you retain. We've been in CLA been trying to explore a lot of this through our committees, and we've actually got a guidance note which goes into some of this, but you know, there are still many unanswered questions surrounding all of this. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things that I would say is that for woodland creation at a small scale of a few acres going through the Woodland Carbon Code, I think you probably find that at current carbon prices, it's not going to generate you money. But I think if you're doing woodland creation at a larger scale, it could do. And stacking other income streams alongside carbon credits, I think is very problematic and will come unstuck on being able to demonstrate additionality, which is, as I said earlier, a key principle of the Woodland Carbon Code. So yeah, currently still an unregulated market, but I suspect in due course, in coming years, I can't see it not being a regulated market.
Yeah, they're really helpful, Graham, and even more reason to keep contact with advisors wherever they are, just to kind of make sure that there's a current. I mean, it feels like a moving target, this one.
Yeah.
That seems like a good moment. We're just at 12:30, so I'm going to draw us to a close now. I just want to thank everybody, most of all the participants, for sort of some fantastic questions. If you haven't had your question answered today, we will be answering all of the questions and they will be circulated by the end of the week. But I did want to just finish by thanking Will, Emma, Graham and Ben for some fantastic presentations. I think we've had a really great sense of the ambition of Severn Treescapes, but also a kind of some of the challenges about how we might deliver that vision. But I hope people are still feeling excited. I hope that there are some of you in the attendees, whether online now or watching this, who want to get in touch to talk to us about next steps. So thank you all. Well, I think one question, Andrew, you got your hand up. Was that a question for now?
Yeah, sorry. Can I just add very quickly that
of course.
it occurred to me that conceptually, like what everybody's talking about today sounds very much like bioregionalism. And if anybody's interested in that, there's a brilliant book by Molly Scott Cato, which I would recommend reading, because it sort of gives a framework for what you're trying to achieve here in terms of food security and things like that. And I just think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, really good point. I love the idea. The bioregion stuff needs to come back into common parlance. You know, hopefully it will be the stacking words of tomorrow, hopefully. Anyway, I want to finish there. We've had a great session today. Thank you all. And I really hope that's given people food for thought, and look forward to talking to many of you about thinking about how we might deliver this vision going forwards. Thanks all very much.